Blake Watley here. On today's video, I want to do a quick lesson on how to throw or how to cast a bait cast reel. If you've watched my other videos on how to set up a bait caster or an open face, I've already explained what I would like for you as a beginner to have your brakes set at. So just to start real quick, before we get into the mechanics of throwing, I want to go over the grip that you'd need to have on this reel to make a proper cast. I'm going to come in close. If you've got pretty much this is what a standard rod and reel looks like at the handle and the reel. You want to take your right hand. This is if you want to cast right-handed. If you want to cast left-handed, if you're left-hand dominant, do everything the same, just with the left hand. But I'm going to take my right hand. I'm going to slide my index finger just inside the trigger of this rod. I'm going to lay these 3 fingers underneath the rod and grip here, and I want my hand in a position where my thumb is about midway of that spool, and the middle of my thumb is here on my button to release my spool. So when I get ready to cast and I click this button down to release my spool, my thumb is holding the spool there for me to be able to make that cast. And that's pretty much the grip I want to hold to learn to cast with. And you can use your left hand on the base of the rod kind of as a fulcrum point to be able to maneuver that rod tip for your cast. Okay, now that we've got the grip mechanics down, basically just a quick overview on how I want you to cast. As you can see, the bait, I've got about 6 inches between the bait and the tip of the rod, whether you're using a bait or a weight or anything you've got tied onto the end to start. And like I said in my other video, for a beginner starting to learn to cast, stay in that 3/8 to ½ ounce weight. Don't go too light, don't go too heavy. That's going to be your easiest weight to cast, and that's also going to be 3/8 to ½ ounce. That's going to cover a large majority of what size weight lures and baits you're going to be using as you learn to fish. So you've got the grip mechanics that I went over with a while ago. The first thing I want you to do as a beginner, instead of trying to do an overhand cast like this, I want to start with a sidearm cast. I want you to, whether you're right or left-handed, I want to do just an easy sweep sidearm cast like this. And I try to explain casting an open face reel kind of like throwing a baseball or a football, and learning to throw any kind of ball. You know, you'll have to learn how much force to apply and where the release point is. Like with throwing a baseball, if you release too early, your ball's going to go up. If you release too late, it's going to go straight in the ground. Same thing goes for a reel. If you're trying to do an overhand cast, well, if you release too early, you're going to go straight up. If you release too late, you're going straight into the ground or into the water, which is going to cause a major backlash and a lot of problems to start. I like to start with that sidearm, because if you release too early, your bait's going to go out there. If you release too late, it's going to go out here. But at least your bait is still flying outwardly, and you're able to watch it and stop that spool before the bait hits the ground. That's the other key. The biggest key to not backlashing a bait caster is when you go to make that cast and you let your thumb off the spool as you cast, you're going to watch your lure or your weight, and just before it hits the ground or just before it hits the water, you want to stop that spool with your thumb. If you don't, when that bait hits, it throws a kink back in the line, and the spool is still spinning at high RPMs, and it'll just blow up like this with line and cause a backlash. So I'll make a few casts like this. This is how I want you to start, and it doesn't matter when you start how hard you're throwing. Start nice and soft. It doesn't matter if you're only casting the lure 10 foot. You want the big key is you just want to get a feel for the mechanics and get used to your reel or your equipment. So sidearm cast like this out there, stop it right before it hits the water or the ground. I'm going to over exaggerate the way I stop this bait just so you can see, you know, what I want you to do. Cast, stop. You know, I'm dropping my rod tip. In actuality, you know, you don't have to be that dramatic about your stop, you can just slow it down. Your thumb, you're going to learn that your thumb is really the best brake you have on the reel. You'll get accustomed to just feathering that lure, kind of slowing them RPMs of the spool down as it's approaching the water. As you know, when you learn to start doing this, it's going to be not as smooth and pretty looking, because you'll be trying to stop that bait. You'll be to prevent a backlash. You'll be trying to stop it, and it still may be this high off the water or the ground, and it'll splash largely instead of small. But all that's fine because you're just learning. But as you become more proficient, you'll be able to just feather that bait into the ground or into the water. And I'm saying ground because you don't have to be at the lake, you don't have to be on a boat, you don't have to be at a pond. You can learn to cast a Baitcaster right here in your backyard with just a little bit of time and effort. Okay, so let's talk about the inevitable, the backlash or problems when you're learning that you're going to run into. Like I said before, with the sidearm cast, and you know that you've got a wide open view in front of you, nobody's standing out here that you could hit. If you're a little bit early and your bait goes over there, that's fine. If you're a little bit late on your release and it comes across over here, that's fine. But your bait's still flying out forward. But for whatever reason, let's say I'm going to go ahead and backlash this reel intentionally. I'm not going to stop the spool as it hits the ground like that. I'm going to come over here close and show you. You look on here, you see a lot of line just peeled up off the spool like this, and you can't engage that reel and reel over the top of that, or it'll never cast correctly on the next cast. So to work out a backlash, what I want you to do, now see, if I let off my thumb, that spool will just start spinning and make the problem worse. So I'm holding the spool with my thumb with a little bit of tension. I'm going to start with the line in this hand. We're going to start working this line off by hand. You start peeling this out while keeping tension on the spool, and as you go to pull this, you'll see some big loops come up and everything else that you're working off. You see that one popped up there. You just keep pulling tightly. Sometimes they'll hang up and you'll have to kind of pull these loops from here and then pull again from your line coming out of your level wind. I'm still pulling, and now I've got that spool pretty smooth down. I've got all the backlash out. So to work this back in, you don't want to just click over and start reeling this line back in with all this slack. You want to take your index finger and your thumb, hold this line between the two, rest these three fingers here, and then engage your reel. Now I'm holding tension on this line as I put it back onto the spool, and that way it goes back on nice and smooth. And if I've pulled out a lot of line, there may be loops down here on the ground, so you don't want to just get to spinning real fast rolling this back up, because you'll just roll a knot or a loop back onto the spool. You want to feed it back in nice and smooth, and then now I've got all the tension out of, all the loops out of the line. I've got tension on it out to wherever my bait is, whether it be the water or the ground, and I don't have to hold that line anymore, and I can just reel that in. And that's pretty much how you work any backlash out. Like I said, the basic mechanics of it are: you're holding the spool with your thumb, you cast, you stop it before it hits the ground. If you do those things, this line's never going to backlash. And if you get a backlash, just about all can be removed from the reel. Some of them that are unchecked, if they're too bad, they do have to be cut. That's just part of it. But that's why, as a beginner, I really want you to start with this sidearm cast, because unless you just drag the ground with it or something like that, you're probably not going to get that bad scenario where an overhand cast, if you let go too late and it hits right here and it just blows up on you before you can stop it. You just get that bait to fly out there smoothly. Once you've got these mechanics down, start working on trying to put the bait where you want it and aiming that bait. To aim the bait and the lure, just like throwing a ball, just focus your eyes on your target and try to put that lure there each time, and you can just set and cast until you get that down more and more. As you become more familiar with your rod and reel, in your open face reel. Start backing off on your brakes, backing off on your course adjust a little bit, and you'll start gaining more distance. You'll realize that you don't have to cast it near as hard to get the distance out of it. If you've got it set up like I wanted you to set it up to begin with, you're not going to get a lot of distance, but it's going to control that spool more and keep you from backlashing as much. How old are you?
6.
Okay. Anybody can do this. Here's my 6-year-old son. He's been casting for about a year. I'm going to step back. He's left-handed. He's doing the same thing with his left hand, though, and he's going to cast this open face reel a couple of times. No backlash?
Nope.
Give me one more. And you stopped it before it hit the ground. Okay, one more. There you go.